You know, when I first started making videos talking about why I didn't agree with these benchmarks that these YouTube channels were doing on Apple Silicon and how it was very unrealistic, I didn't really expect it to be as popular as it was, and I definitely didn't expect it to be sort of the thing that a lot of you like to see from this channel, but that became pretty obvious with the poll I put up on the community page because, well, when I asked, you all said that it was what you wanted to see. So here we are one more time. Now, before we dive in, I just want to say a huge thanks to Exter for partnering with me for a portion of this video. Now, in these last videos I did, I mainly came at these benchmarks from a general consumer's perspective because I have firsthand experience with customers getting confused when these videos get involved. Because when these people go and buy a computer, they may have not looked at these videos and seen these benchmarks, but the person who they see as a more techie person, maybe a relative who seems to be a little more technologically inclined, probably did. And what this techie person is going to say is, oh, this is a worse machine, don't buy it, and not really have the knowledge or context to realize that most general consumers don't care about these things that are being portrayed as worse. And so it makes this massive amount of confusion that generally just stalls the customer from getting something that would generally be useful for them, and also shows that these people who are more techie are just absorbing knowledge without really taking the time to learn the context. I did multiple videos about it, obviously. If you want to check one of them out, you can check it out over there. But when it comes to my personal experience, I can obviously go and kind of put myself in a general consumer's mindset when I'm looking at a computer for what it is and how it'll be used. But when I'm personally buying a computer, I look at it from a video editor's perspective. And today in this video, I'm talking about why these benchmarks don't matter from a video editor's perspective. And I got a lot of different points of data to talk about, and I spent way more time than I should have scientifically showing why these benchmarks don't matter. So let's dive in. So when it comes to my video editing experience, obviously we have this YouTube channel here, and I use a pretty reasonable Sony 4K camera pushing out S-Log3. Nothing crazy, easy for my computer to digest and work with, easy to color grade, easy. Now, when it comes to the other video work I do, I will do client-based color grading, and this has let me work with a ton of formats, a ton of resolutions, and, well, generally, a ton of camera types, including Blackmagic, Red, I've worked with Sony, I've worked with Canon, and the formats include ProRes, Blackmagic RAW, Red RAW, and I've done 1080p, 4K, 8K, and 12K. So I have a lot of different kinds of things that I can pull from in terms of experience. So for the test I wanted to do, I took two programs that are the most extreme programs that I would normally use, and I made a test with them. The first program in this test is DaVinci Resolve because it runs on the three computers that I'll be testing, which include my gaming PC, my base model Mac Studio, and my base model Mac Mini. In Blackmagic, I took Blackmagic's 8K test footage that they provide on their website, and I created a 1.5 minute test, and I exported it out at a lower resolution, going from 8K down to 4K. I compressed it down to 8,000 kilobits per second, which is pretty small, but generally more consumable for website use. And I exported it in H.264 and H.265 and ran this test on all three of those computers. The second program I'm using in this test is Handbrake, and for the Handbrake test, I'm taking a 1080p uncompressed MKV file pulled from a Blu-ray and compressing it down to 8,000 kilobits per second, and I'm also exporting it in H.264 and H.265. When it comes to the data I pulled for these tests, I actually didn't pull the times that it took for these videos to export because that's not the focus here. The main focus is the temperatures, because that's something people complain about a lot. The usage, seeing if running your CPU at 100% is realistic in benchmarking, and just because I could, I pulled the speeds of the SSDs on each of these systems while running the tests, because the big controversy now is, of course, the SSDs on the new Macs are slower than the old ones. So let's see if those speeds actually affect use case. All right, so now that you know my testing methodology and I've got all that information out of the way on what we'll be doing, let's take a look at the first graph, which is GPU and CPU utilization in DaVinci Resolve. So starting out on this graph with the base model Mac Mini that's only sporting 8 gigabytes of RAM, we can see that on average the CPU is being used 100%. That's a lot of utilization. And then the GPU is being used 86% average. That is a lot. But again, we're telling this thing to scale an 8K video down to 4K, and it was never really meant to do that. But it's impressive it was able to pull it off nonetheless. So 100% CPU, 86% GPU, that's a lot of work for that poor little thing. Now moving over to the Mac Studio, we can see that the CPU usage is almost half at 57%, and the GPU usage is also lower at 68%. Now, I feel like this is potentially because the Mac Studio has the integrated video encoders, so it's probably dumping a lot more of that workload off onto those encoders. But lower CPU and GPU usage will most likely mean better temperatures, so that's a plus. Then looking at my gaming PC, for the specs of the gaming PC, I have a Ryzen 7 5800X and an RTX 3070 running on this. And you can see the CPU is running at 24% average, while the GPU is sitting at 100%.
Hold up, wait a minute, something ain't right.
This is why I mentioned the video encoder on the Mac Studio, because it's not quite accurate to say that the GPU was running at 100%. It was not fully utilizing the GPU core at 100%, but Windows is weird about how it tracks its averages and its percentages. That 100% usage is coming from the video encoder, the NVENC encoder on the NVIDIA GPU. So while the system is utilizing 100% of the GPU in Windows' perspective, it's actually not. It's only fully utilizing the video encoder. But still, that's actually really cool that it knew to just dump everything over to the video encoder and just crank through the project that way. But overall, less work on the CPU, tons of work on the video encoder on the GPU, but not a whole lot else. Now, with all of that information on the utilization of these systems in DaVinci Resolve, let's take a look at how that actually affects the temperatures. So just like we did before, we're going to start out with the Mac Mini, and you can see that the GPU core, at least based on iStatistica, was getting an average of 45 degrees Celsius. It's not too bad, especially considering that it was running at 86% utilization, but again, this is meant to be a very power efficient system. However, we did see an average of 70 degrees Celsius on the CPU side. Now, this was probably due to the combination of the performance cores and the efficiency cores just running fully maxed out, and the performance cores tend to be a little bit hotter, and I would imagine being in such close proximity, you'd see some heat overall spreading, but yeah, 70 degrees average on the CPU package. Not terrible, definitely a little warm for a power efficient system like this. You don't usually see them running that hot, but not the end of the world, and it just sat there and didn't really do much. Next up, we have the Mac Studio, and, well, this thing just runs cool as a cucumber. We've got 37 degrees Celsius average on the GPU and 46 degrees Celsius on average on the CPU. What do you want to say? The thing's got two massive fans, and because it's the base model, it doesn't have as many GPU cores, and, well, it's extremely power efficient. So, you know, runs nice and cool. But so does the gaming PC. We've got 58 degrees Celsius on average coming from the GPU, which makes sense considering that one specific portion of the GPU is cranked at 100%. And, well, because the CPU isn't doing a whole lot, but it is still a Ryzen system, you're looking at 42 degrees Celsius, which is fine, but I would have expected a little bit lower for a liquid-cooled system, so I'll probably have to look at that later. So I guess what we're taking away from this so far is that the Mac Studio, which was meant for this kind of work, doesn't run hot, and even under one of my more extreme workloads, it's not running at 100% on either the GPU or the CPU. And the gaming PC definitely isn't running anywhere close to 100% on the CPU, and the GPU has a specific portion that's meant to go at 100% while still not running hot. But looking at the Mac Mini, it was never meant for this, and it was running at 100%. So I guess if you do want to run a benchmark that goes to 100% on the Mac Mini, it's valid if you're looking to buy a base model Mac Mini to encode 8K footage down to 4K, which most people never will. Oh, and actually, while we're talking about this DaVinci Resolve benchmark, let's take a look at how the SSDs are doing. Because remember, the new Mac Minis have a slower set of SSDs, or rather a slower single SSD chip, because Apple reduced the numbers from 2 to 1. So if we're going from, 3 to 5 gigabytes per second down to 2 gigabytes per second, let's take a look at how much is actually getting utilized. So just starting right out, you can see the graph only goes up to 500 megabytes per second because, well, the Mac Mini only ever pulled 176 megabytes per second when reading and 9 for writing. So a far cry from the 1 to 2 gigabytes per second you're getting from these slower SSDs. Now, with the Mac Studio, this thing can write at 5 gigabytes per second on the SSD, and on average, just because it was able to crank out the videos a little bit faster, we were seeing a read speed of 268 megabytes per second and a write speed of 16. I'm seeing a pattern. Now, on the gaming PC, we have a 1TB PCIe Gen 4 NVMe SSD that can easily do 5 gigabytes per second as well, and it's giving you 286 megabytes per second of read and 5 of write, lower than the Mac Mini. So these programs clearly are not using the SSDs to their full capacity because they don't have to. Next up is the Handbrake test, and I was actually really excited to see the results of this because I know that if you just select straight H.264 or H.265, it can really, really hit the CPU, and if you use Toolbox on Mac or Handbrake on PC, it can also very heavily utilize the GPU. So I used the Toolbox preset for H.264 and H.265 on the Macs, and I used the Handbrake encoder on the PC, and here are the results. So keep in mind, we're compressing a 1080p video, so it's not as demanding as compressing 8K to 4K, but it's still going to very, very heavily hit the system, and we can see that the Mac Mini is giving us 91% average of CPU usage and 24% average of GPU usage. Okay, actually not 100%, which I was kind of expecting, but then I also realized we're not working with 8K anymore, so probably not as difficult. Next up, we have the Mac Studio, which was utilizing 86% of the CPU and 17% of the GPU. Again, not working with 8K, we're working with 1080p, but it is compressing a fully uncompressed MKV rip. And on top of that, it's anime, so it's also burning in the subtitles while we're doing this. Now, next up is the PC, and apparently the Handbrake encoder just really likes to favor the GPU over the CPU because we can see 83% average usage on the GPU side, while 66% of the CPU is being used on average. Not exactly the result I was expecting, but it is cool to see that some programs on PC will heavily favor the parallel processing of a GPU over just dumping things to the CPU. So now that I've shown that Handbrake is definitely heavily using the system, not as heavily as I thought, but still pretty heavily, let's take a look at the temperatures. And, well, yeah, they're not actually that high. We can see that the Mac Mini is actually generally getting a lower temperature reading at 31 degrees Celsius on the GPU and 68 degrees Celsius on the CPU. That's actually not too bad. I was expecting it to be a little hotter because, again, I was expecting more CPU usage, but still pretty cool. Definitely lower than what we're going to see here in a minute. Next up is the Mac Studio, and we can see that we've got a 32 degrees Celsius average on the GPU and 55 degrees Celsius average on the CPU. These are actually pretty similar results to what we saw during the DaVinci Resolve test, so nothing crazy here. We already knew the Mac Studio had an extremely good cooling system, and this just continues to prove that. Now lastly, we have the gaming PC, and we can see that 3070 is sitting happily around 56 degrees. Again, with it utilizing the video encoder, not so much the 3D graphics cores, it's not a surprise that it's not running the temperatures super, super high. Now, what is a surprise is that we have 76 degrees average on the CPU. Again, this is a Ryzen 7 5800X. I'm kind of surprised that it was running this hot considering it was liquid cooled, but it's still not very high temperatures compared to some of the older systems I used to have. So overall, not terrible. But now for the last portion, let's take a look at how the SSDs were utilized. Again, we know the specs of the SSDs, very fast, and the new ones are slower, so they're definitely worse. Let's see what the utilization is. Yeah, okay. Yeah, you can see that the maximum of this graph has been dropped to 200 megabytes per second, which is even lower than the 500 megabytes per second we used earlier, which is again still lower than the 2 gigabytes per second the slower SSDs can do, and even slower than the 5 gigabytes per second that the better SSDs can do. And we can see that the Mac Mini is writing at an average of 40 megabytes per second and reading at an average of 8 megabytes per second. This continues on with the Mac Studio at an average of 70 megabytes per second for read and 13 for write, and then the PC at 57 megabytes per second for read and 11 for write. This is the most amount of data I have ever collected for a video just to show people how stupid benchmarks were. And honestly, I hope that this is the last video like this I have to make. Generally, I will say what I said months back when I first made one of these videos, which is that if you are going to buy a system, do your research and buy something that not only is going to last you for what you need it to do at the moment you buy it, but buy something that is going to last you for many, many years. Yeah, the Mac Studio is probably going to get updated in a few months, but I don't care because my Mac Studio is still more than enough for what I need. It's handled all the way up to 12K footage with no issues, and as you can see from this, yeah, it's barely working when I'm doing 8K to 4K, and most of my videos here are 4K, so it's hardly working at all. I bought something that's going to last me a very long time. If you're buying something based on a recommendation of an extreme use case that will never happen in the real world, then you're probably not getting something that you're going to actually need. And I feel like these tests kind of prove that, because I'm showing you temperatures that are well within what I would consider reasonable. You're looking at usage that, yeah, in some instances are at 100% of either a piece of the hardware that is meant for the job you're doing, in the case of the gaming PC, or running the CPU at 100% because you're doing something the system was never intended to do. I put the Mac Studio in the middle of these graphs specifically because I knew that it would be the sort of middle ground, the one that was going to handle the tasks I threw at it just fine because it was meant for that. I knew that the extreme ends of the gaming PC and the Mac Mini base model were going to be skyrocketing for certain tests and showing really high or really low readings, but the Mac Studio would be consistent because it was meant for those tasks. I've said it once, I'll say it again, I'll say it as many times as I have to. Buy what fits your needs perfectly. Don't go buying a base model computer and expecting the world out of it, but don't go buying a $4,000 workstation to browse Facebook. Every tool has a purpose. Every purpose has a tool tailored for it. And actually, on the topic of every use case having the correct tool, when it comes to carrying around your cards and keeping them protected and also being able to find them, Exter makes some pretty good tools for that use case. Exter makes some pretty cool wallets. I would consider them actually pretty premium wallets. The two that they sent over to me are the leather wallet with the AirTag holder and their general card holder made of aluminum, which is really nice, and it also has an AirTag holder. I've personally been using the aluminum one, and I love it. It's actually really cool because you can put your cards on the outside underneath of this little cover here, which also houses the AirTag hole, and it's got this little trigger that pops your cards out of the top. That's actually really, really cool. It's also a super fidgety little toy that I'll play with at work. Now, I don't usually partner with companies or talk about their products unless I think the products are actually that good. And, well, I do think these products are actually that good. It's the only socially acceptable fidget toy, and it also feels really great in the pocket. It's only a little bit thicker than an iPhone, and because I use AirTags for, like, everything, the fact that you can put an AirTag in the little holder of either of them means that you get all of the benefits of an AirTag in a wallet that holds more cards than the little MagSafe wallet that Apple includes. And because it's an AirTag, it works anywhere when you have it integrated versus the Apple Wallet that I used to use, which just says, hey, your wallet fell off somewhere. I think it was in this area. Hope nobody stole it. And because Exter partnered with me for this portion of the video, you can save up to 35% off on their wallets by going to the link down below, shop.exter.com/Garrett Crespo, and using my promo code Garrett. Again, I don't partner with companies unless I do think their products are actually that good, and I do think that these folks make some fantastic products. So go check out the link in the description, and again, huge thanks to Exter for partnering with me for this portion of the video. Like I said at the start of the video, when I first started making these videos, I didn't expect them to kind of become what they've become, but I'm glad you all are enjoying them. I'm going to kind of slow down on this kind of content and kind of focus on stuff that I really enjoy doing now, but if you want to see more stuff like this, maybe leave a like, subscribe definitely if you think that you're going to enjoy what I make, and leave some comments. I do try to interact with you all, and I'm really curious to see what your input is on a video like this. Again, I really hope you took something away from this video, and I'll see you all in the next one. Make sure to be there, and have a good one.